to the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and my co-host is Caitlin Drake. Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. Today, our guest is Boston Avenue's Minister of Missions, Reverend Sara Pugh Mongomery. Hi, Sara.
Hey, y'all. What's up?
Okay, Sara. So last month we had Dr. Gary Peluso-Verdend on the podcast to talk about how Christians should approach both Columbus Day and Thanksgiving, particularly when acknowledging that white Christian nationalist colonialist history. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he mentioned was the value in the Christian practice of giving thanks and really pivoting for Thanksgiving to move it to a more gratitude-centered event, but also gratitude year-round. And it seems like gratitude is such an important topic, so we thought we'd do a whole podcast on it, especially with Thanksgiving just around the corner. So to start with, around gratitude, is there a biblical basis for practicing gratitude?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll kind of begin that conversation with probably one of the places that folks like to talk about the least, which is the practice of tithing. So the practice of tithing really begins our whole conversation around gratitude, because the spiritual practice of tithing is all about being able to give back to God out of the abundance of what God has given us. So it's giving that thanks back to God by giving of those resources. And so when we talk about the tithe, the biblical tithe, it's not from what's left over, but rather it's from the beginning parts. And it's that first 10% of the harvest that is given to God. So it is this offering of gratitude in a lot of ways. And so we can kind of look at that about how, from the Old Testament perspective, that God from the beginning was encouraging us to have a heart of gratitude. And that sort of looks at also as well about how God really looks at gratitude as a place of thinking about how God is about abundant life, not about living within the fear of scarcity. And we can see that as well within our wisdom literature. And so our wisdom literature, the Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, they kind of all are reminding us about this gift of gratitude and being able to live in these grateful parts with God. And so you'll have some Proverbs that, kind of talk about being able to give thanks. And you have these Psalms of Thanksgiving that are all about giving thanks to God. And Ecclesiastes, which is a really fascinating book, is in the end kind of about just be grateful for your life and for the way you're going to live, because one day you're going to die. And so let's be grateful for what you got right now and be able to live in the midst of that. And then you'll also be able to see that in a lot of the letters later on in the New Testament, they open up with a word of gratitude around the community. And so the letter might begin with a prayer of gratitude or a giving thanks for what that community has already done within the world. And so you can really kind of see, in each part of our biblical narrative, how we are centered in being formed by gratitude.
I think I mentioned it on a previous podcast, but I had recently read A Year of Living Biblically by A.J. Jacobs. And one of the things that he talks about as an outcome of that whole experience, where he tries to literally follow the Bible and all of its instructions for the duration of a year, was the positive takeaway of the practice of gratitude, mm-hmm. and how that really shaped his experience and something that he would do going forward, regardless of some of the other pieces of faith mm-hmm. or practice.
Mm-hmm. Why is practicing gratitude important?
Well, gratitude, it's really this place of being able to move us away from our own ego and moving us away from thinking about what we have done to being able to look at what God is doing within the world. Again, kind of when you go back biblically, you can think about the 10 lepers that were healed, and only a couple of them came back. Only one, I think, came back to say thank you to Jesus. And he asked, where's the other 9? What has happened to the other ones? Do they just think that they healed themselves? It was a part of Jesus doing it. So gratitude really kind of pushes us away from that place of thinking and focusing just on our sense of self and our sense of ego within that. It also really kind of helps us us to move away from that place of scarcity. And so when we are, at least I know when I am not in a place of being grateful or a state of gratitude within my life, I might look at the world as having not enough. That there's not enough food, there's not enough love, there's not enough good people in the world, there's not enough, things to be able that will bring me joy. But instead, God really is all about this idea of abundance. And so gratitude helps kind of reshift and reshape our eyes and our lens to being able to see that sense of abundance in the world. So you'll think about multiplying the loaves and the fishes. Like there was an abundance out of something that was so small, or manna that was pouring down from heaven for the Israelites. There was abundance even in the midst of the desert and the wandering around. And so this idea of gratitude kind of pushes our eyes to looking at what God is doing in the world instead of what isn't happening within the world. And there's a lot of really great science around kind of how gratitude helps us as well, physiologically. So, when you are practicing gratitude and living within that grateful place, your blood pressure actually decreases, your heart rate can decrease, you'll receive more oxygen because you're in a not as tense of a state, you're not in that state of fight or flight, which is where we might be if we're looking at scarcity models and living within scarcity. And so this whole idea of gratitude and practicing gratitude also helps us physiologically as well, along with being able to help us within our spiritual walk with God.
So we're staring down the barrel of the Christmas season and all of the chaos and the pressures that come with it. So beyond all of those benefits that you mentioned, is there a good reason for us to take time during this particular season, especially when it feels like we don't have enough time to do all of the things, to be practicing gratitude?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of this a lot as a mom of, 3 young kids and sort of how I'm going to help. I have the ability right now to shape what the Christmas season looks like for us and sort of what that would mean. And is it going to be where, every time there's a commercial, my daughter, or any of my daughters, but the one that talks right now would look up and say, like, I want that, like, give me that, is that going to be sort of the way that we approach the world? Or are we going to be able to help frame some of those conversations? She's a kid, she's going to want things, but how can I help frame that with being able to think about, well, what do we already have? And so I think some of the things during the Christmas season that really help us be able to practice gratitude is looking at giving thanks in the midst of receiving. And so, so often we forget to actually give thanks for what we do have or for what we receive within that. It's something as simple as being able to write a thank you note. And so being able to have that practice so that even when you have this idea of receiving a gift, you're also emphasizing this gratitude and this gratefulness at the other end of that. And I think also this practice of gratitude as a spiritual practice during this season of Advent, preparing us for Christmas, just helps us really be able to welcome Christ into the world in a different way. And so perhaps we would not be looking so much at these ideas of want, but instead looking at what do we already have? What are we grateful for that's around us? What do we have in abundance that we can give to others? And so that this practice of preparing our hearts for welcoming Christ into the world really can help us focus on this practice of gratitude.
Is gratitude a solitary practice, or is it one done that in community?
And this is a both yes. So it is something where you can do it as a solitary practice, and you can also do it within a spiritual practice within a community, because it's for all of our spiritual practices that we have, it's both. And so it's something that's shaping you as an individual, but can also help powerfully shape a community. I think of my church out in Coweta, of being able to think about gratitude as a communal practice with them out there. We were in a place of not being able to have enough money to be able to pay our bills. We were looking at the fact that if we had continued our spending the way we were spending, that we would have been completely bankrupt by December, and that the church would have had to close down. And so what we did as a church, when we were looking within that as a place of scarcity and as a place of not having enough, the church was in a big state of fear. They were afraid of closing. They were afraid of what that would mean for them. They were afraid of, having a pastor. They were afraid of all of these different pieces. But when we started to live into the model of looking at what do we have and what are some of the abundant things that are within this community, that really helped shape and shift our community and our church life together. And so people increased their giving because they were living within a place of gratitude at that point. So we were able to look at our community life center and the ways that we could share the gift of that community life center and how that could be a part of shaping our community. And they were able to think of new missions and new ministries that were focusing on gratitude rather than focusing on scarcity. And when we've shifted that focus, they became healthier as a congregation. And therefore, we became healthier financially as a congregation as well.
And thinking of that community practice, here at Boston Avenue, Eva Marie put together a calendar for November, and every day was a different thing to be thankful for. So some of them were like a book that you're thankful for or a tradition you're thankful for. And some of them were maybe a little more abstract, like a mission that you're thankful for, which you could read as a lot of different ways. And the Sunday school class that I'm a part of, our girls' subset of that decided to do the calendar together. So every day we would look at what the activity was or what the gratitude idea was, and then share what our personal thing was. And I found that doing that in community kept me accountable for actually doing it, which was really delightful because I wouldn't do it otherwise. I'd forget or get busy or, be like, this is too hard or too abstract. I don't know. And it's helped build relationship with each other. We've gotten to know each other so much more by knowing what those pieces of gratitude in our lives that really have shaped us be who we are. So I think yesterday was tradition. And so everybody was sharing their own family Christmas traditions. And it was really uplifting and also really cool to see these intimate parts of people's lives because those family traditions are so sacred for so many people. So for me, doing it as a communal practice definitely had its benefits. And I think it's my first time doing gratitude communally because I've always viewed it as an individual practice.
Yeah, and that's a great example of being able to see how that shaped that group together. And I bet that you were also being shaped individually within that communal practice. And so I also think of a story of a friend of mine from seminary of how gratitude really shaped her as an individual practice. So she wasn't kind of in that dual role, like having a community of folks and having the individual shaping. But she knew that she was in basically a funk. She was in a bad place. She went to a counselor to be able to receive the mental health help that she needed. But then she also realized that, there needed to be a new spiritual practice for her to help her be able to look at the world differently. And so she started to write in a gratitude journal for 6 months. So each day she looked for the 5 different things that she was grateful for. And she would be able to write down those 5 things. And so that allowed her each day to kind of see the world through the lens of gratitude. So just like y'all communally being able to see the world each day through that piece of gratitude. And as she was doing that, it got her out of the funk because she wasn't viewing the world in those negative frameworks anymore. And so it really helped her within that individual practice as well. So you can kind of see it on both sides and both levels.
What are some gratitude practices that might be good to try during the year?
Yeah, there are so many cool things that we can do together. And I think especially as we're gearing towards the beginning of a new year, that these are perhaps some practices that we can all start as a community or as a place of being able to do it individually that can shape our community as well. And so I've had a couple of ideas, but I know that there's probably lots more. And so one of those is a really great idea of a gratitude jar. And so I've seen this on Facebook and other places of social media, but have also seen some families do it. And so what they do is that when there is an act or something that happens within their communal life together, or even individually, they're able to write that down and say, this was a moment of gratitude. And so they're looking each day for those moments to be able to write down. And then at the end of the year, the family will take that gratitude jar, or the individual will be able to take that gratitude jar and be able to read about the many different ways that that God has been a part of their lives throughout the year, so they can see what it is that they're thankful for. And that can be something, very small, like, I am really thankful for that gingerbread ice cream at Brahms because that stuff is delicious. But it can also be something a lot bigger. Like, I'm thankful that my twin girls didn't have to go into the NICU. And so to be able to not have that have to be a part of our experience. And so, you can have both things, like the small along with the really big gratitude places. And then you can also have moments where you share that on social media. And so just like Caitlin was talking about sharing those moments with her friends, being able to have that be a social media sharing. And the more that we kind of get those images of thankfulness onto social media, the more that idea of gratitude as a daily practice and as a practice during the whole year will continue to build.
And you've been using a hashtag lately that kind of does orient towards gratitude.
Yes. Yeah, it's the hashtag of find your joy. And so being able to look at sort of what has brought joy to my life that day. And so it is a hashtag of gratitude and of being able to give
And
thanks.
some days it's hard to think about
Yes.
what is the joy for that day. So it has you really think about, where did I see joy on this day? Because some days it's harder than others.
That's right. And again, that looks at the piece of the fact that, it doesn't have to be a huge, big thing. So maybe within that day that is really hard or crummy, or, when things aren't with the butterflies and the rainbows and, the angels singing around you, that it's what small moment of gratitude, what small piece of joy am I going to lift up for that day? And so it could be a really small part of that day. Maybe it's, a lot of people that are older always talk about how every day they wake up and they say, I just thank God that I'm on the other side of the grass this morning, and so being able to have that gift of life each day. And then there's also, we've talked about the gratitude journals, and so the ways that you can write down each day those pieces of gratitude. And sometimes that's better for folks that maybe aren't quite as ready yet to share those openly and publicly, but being able to have that journal piece. And then another piece that was a practice that the family that I lived with up in New York City, they taught me, and I loved this practice, is that we did a prayer at the table each day and had a different letter. So one of the kids would pick a letter of the alphabet, and then we'd go around the table and be able to say something that we're thankful for that starts with that letter. And so it was, obviously you have to use this with kids that can perhaps spell. So like it wouldn't work very well right now with Ruth or the twins. But this is a great practice to be able to have around tables, or when you're starting a committee meeting, have somebody pick out a letter and have everybody go around and be able to say something that they're thankful for that starts with that letter. Because there's so much to be thankful for each day. And so really kind of taking that time to focus on it.
I'm going to recommend that we do that at our next staff meeting.
Oh, it's a great idea.
Looking specifically at this kind of chaotic window that we're living in of almost coming up on Christmas, all of that amplifying stress around the holidays, what are gratitude practices that might be particularly good during this holiday season?
Yeah, I think a lot about looking for ways to share and to show that gratitude to others. I think of a friend that I have that's going through a really hard time right now. So being able just to call her up and to take her out for lunch, that's a way to be able to share gratitude during this holiday season, because she's going to feel a little bit more alone and a little bit more lost. And so also being able to think about, are there people that we know that are hungry, and how can we share from the abundance of our food? How can we share from the abundance of community? If you find a place to belong, how can you share that sense of belonging with somebody else? And so being able to have this idea of thinking about sharing. And so holiday seasons, people are always looking at ways to be able to give and to share with others. And so I think that's a great practice of being able to reflect on your own life about what is it that I'm thankful for and how can I share that practice with others. And then I also love the practice of being able to think about a gift for someone. So instead of maybe a physical gift, because, folks like my husband, he doesn't really need anything in life. And we always talk about that if there is something that we need, we just go out and buy it. But a gift that I could give him would be perhaps looking and thinking about what is it that I'm grateful for about him within my life. And then finding a nonprofit organization that matches that gift. And so, for him, he has a huge passion about healthcare. So maybe I could contribute to an organization that's all about reaching out and helping those that don't have health insurance. And then I can write a letter to him about what I'm grateful for about him within my life and the way that he shares that with the world, and that's the gift to be able to give to him. And so that way we can reshape the ways that we're also giving. I'd also invite you just to take some time during the holiday season to have quiet moments and to be able to experience life in a true way. Because I think sometimes our sense of gratitude can be kind of pushed out if we're just rushing and going from point to point to point to point. And so really kind of being able to refocus in on those simple moments. And so, when you're making hot chocolate with somebody, being able to just pause and to give thanks. When you're making your gingerbread house, being able to pause and to give thanks. When you're wrapping those Christmas presents, giving thanks for each person that you're wrapping them for. And if you need a time to be able to truly have quietness, to come and to join us on Fridays at noon in our Rose Chapel here at the church, where we have a 30-minute time of silent meditation each week. And that perhaps that just kind of refocusing on Fridays might help you be able to get through the season and to refocus in on the gratitude.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just grateful to be here and grateful for y'all and for the Ascends podcast.
Thank you for joining us, Sarah. This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. We are located at 1301 South Boston Avenue in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please check out our social media for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.